Hey y'all, welcome back to Bowls with the Bard. My name is Cakes. I am your host. Today, we are continuing to talk about the problem plays with a discussion about The Winter's Tale. If the definition of a problem play is a play that makes it hard for you to tell if it is a comedy or a tragedy, I think The Winter's Tale slots pretty perfectly into that definition. We will dive a little bit more into that a bit later, but first, let's meet our guests for today. First, we have a return guest to the show. We have Regine Vital. Regine, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes. Hi, I'm Regine Vital, she, her, hers. And I am super excited to be back to talk about this play, which is like one of my favorites. It's in the top three, and it's like vying for first place, to be perfectly honest, in my heart and in my mind. So yay.
I feel that. It's in my top three as well. So
Nice.
Awesome. And our second guest today is new to the podcast, though we have been meaning to have him on for a very long time.
Boy, have we ever.
Yes, we have. We have Brendan Edward Kennedy with us. Brendan, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. My name is Brendan Edward Kennedy. You can call me Brendan. The Edward is just in there because you gotta have a name. It's my professional name. Pronouns he, him, his. Yeah, super jazzed to be here as Cakes, or as I called her, Michaela. That's how I know you. I was like, oh, Cakes, delicious.
Yes.
We have been talking about getting me on this here podcast since before. Since in the before times, really.
Oh, wow.
Back when we were working with Brave Spirits Theatre, rest in peace. So really happy to be here finally.
Yeah, I'm so excited to have you both. I am so jazzed to talk about this play. We've definitely had some conversations that could be a little bit of a downer for some of these plays this season. So I'm excited to have one that's a little bit less of a downer. I mean, there's some stuff in here that'll be a little rough, but this play's more fun to talk about. But before we dive into that, I mean,
Does it?
Ooh.
Okay, we're already digging into the controversy.
Yeah,
Get
right?
ready, everybody.
Right? Well, before we get too far in, I am going to smoke a bowl. Regine is going to drink some wine, and Brendan is going to allow his edible to kick in a little bit more. All right, y'all, we are back. We are nice and lit and ready to talk about The Winter's Tale.
We're going to talk about Winter's Tale, man.
Yeah.
Oh, God, I'm sorry.
No, it's beautiful. So, as I was saying at the top, Winter's Tale really does slot like perfectly into the definition of a problem play. But unlike something like Measure for Measure that gives you kind of like a whiplash feel where you're going back and forth between the comedy tragedy, Winter's Tale kind of gives you like a tale of two halves. Like one half is quite tragic and dramatic, and the second half feels like comedic and lovely. And I feel like if you're an audience member who is not prepared for that, can really catch you off guard. So I guess my first question about this play is like, how do we handle such a drastic tonal shift in the middle of a play? And how do we like allow our audiences to, I don't know, experience that in a way that isn't confusing or that doesn't throw them off? Regine, do you want to start?
Sure. I don't know, to be perfectly honest, that you can like kind of pre-plan that, because the reality with a lot of Shakespeare is folks come into the space with their attitudes about it already. So if you're somebody who knows the Winter's Tale and you kind of know what's going to happen, then you're prepared, right, for the fact that this first half is going to be like really hard and maybe even kind of suck emotionally, and then it's going to be like fun, but also what the fuck, and then like maybe it figures itself out. And if you don't know the Winter's Tale, then even in the fun parts, you're kind of like, what the fuck is going on and why? And I think all you can do if you're producing the play is sort of maybe lean into the fact that it's a little bit what's going on. I think the thing that I like about the Winter's Tale, the new, it's not new, but like, before it was just, what is it, a comedy or is it a tragedy? And now we're in a place where we have multiple genres in Shakespeare, right? Is a comedy, tragedy, history, romance. And I think the idea of a romance is really helpful because a romance almost can be anything, particularly like a fairy tale. So if you're cool with like, Sleeping Beauty, starting off with a party and then like the baddest witch in town comes in, fuck all y'all, she's gone, like sleep for forever and y'all gonna regret shit right at the top. If you can handle that, then I think like you're actually more prepared to handle the Winter's Tale than you think. And I kind of feel like I always think when doing the romances, play up the fairy tale of it, play up the like sort of otherworldliness of it, because that actually kind of helps soften the edges of the parts that feel a little, whoa, what's going on?
Huh. I love that.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I resonate with that. I think it's interesting that like we do, I guess, kind of set ourselves up for a sort of expectation when we categorize these plays in a certain way. And like when you take it out of that context, it is like, oh yeah, well, in other stories you get happy and sad all the time. So
because like problem plays are what we're talking about. And like it's funny because like the term problem play is like, who even says that anymore? But also like, no, but really, like some of these plays, like what the fuck? They're like, not only are they problems because we don't quite know what they are, but some of them are problematic. But when it comes to like, categorization, I always say, yes, it is weird when you can't quite pinpoint what it is. But also like, if you had told me the first time I read Hamlet that it's actually funny as hell, I'd have been like, what are you talking about? That play is funny as shit. Like the first time I saw it, I was like, laughing out loud, and I was like,
it's a laugh riot.
It is so I'm serious though. Yeah. And who would have thought that? Like, I mean, I think Hamlet is the ultimate problem play, and that's just one reason why. But yeah, I think there's a world where if you just expect the unexpected and you'll be fine. Yeah.
Sure.
I vibe with that. Brendan, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, I've been in this play twice, and I've seen it once. So one thing that helps to prepare the audience for that big tonal shift is by having a really good actor who plays time. In both productions I've been in, one with Chesapeake Shakespeare Company and Baltimore Shakespeare Factory, both obviously utilize time, the character, to kind of as a guide to be like, hey, everybody, you're about to see something very different because some time has passed. And one production, the Chesapeake Shakespeare, really leaned into the magical element, presenting time as sort of this, well, initially a character who is shrouded in rags and then transforms into someone much like a Disney princess. Like to literally, kind of flip-flop between, we were in the dark times and now we're in the bright times. And the Baltimore Shakespeare Factory one had a more grounded approach with time as this sort of maternal, like, gardener character who came in with like overalls and like a floppy sun hat and gardening gloves, setting up the budding romance between Florizel and Perdita, and just kind of inviting people in and say, hey, everybody, some time has passed. Less in a grander sort of way, more of a grounded kind of way. And to speak to the sort of overly categorized sort of way that we have organized the canon of Shakespeare, like Shakespeare, if you said, "Oh, Shakespeare, hey, I've been working through some of your problem plays," he would first say, "Wow, you speak very differently than I do." And two, "What's a problem play?" So yeah, like you can do a lot with this play, and you can, as you said, set it up as kind of like a fairy tale. It is literally a tale. Like, sad tales are best for winter. Was I think the line that Mamilius, rest in peace, King, says. Justice for Mamilius. This play does not do that poor baby any justice. We'll get into that later. But, I think what you can do is set up that this is. I feel like this play is sort of kind of gearing towards something much like a storybook with, big, sudden, grand changes that occur. Yeah, I think if you sort of lean into that, that could also be a very, very good way to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. And just really quickly, I think I agree with if the person playing time is really able to sort of, whether it's something simple or something that feels, grander and more magical, but just really, if you can get the audience to trust that person, right? Mm-hmm. Like, trust me, it's been 16 years. Everybody's 16 years older. So like time does what it does. And also, we're going to go to a different place for a little bit, like a very different place. And if you just kind of trust that person and what they're telling you, then like, oh, okay. Like, and it's time, right? Like what more kind of all encompassing being could there be besides time? So if you trust that person and trust like that they're leading you aright in terms of the story, I think that that's really helpful as well.
That's so cool. I'm so glad that you guys brought up that character. I feel like they have one monologue, so it's so easy you could forget that character even exists. And I think I have seen productions that just cut it flat out.
That's a shame.
Exactly.
Why?
Exactly. Like it's such an excellent transition point, and I think you're right. Like I've seen several different iterations of sort of like a grand magical being playing that part, and it helps with the transition.
Yeah.
I mean, Shakespeare included it for a reason.
Yes.
Yeah.
You can chop and screw Shakespeare how you want, but there are some structural elements, let's say, like a load-bearing monologue that you can't just get rid of.
Yeah.
Sorry, shots fired.
No, you're absolutely right. It's like there are certain structural things that you like, in history plays, for example, it's random people who aren't actually that important to the history part of the play, but give you important exposition. It's like, no, there's information you need to know. There's context you need to have in order for the next 3 acts to make any fucking sense, right? Or like, there's information you need to know in order for like what we just watched in the last 4 acts to make sense in what's about to happen. So, and time is one of those monologues. Like if you take it away, it's weird. It's like you're taking away one of the like structural poles on which the whole thing sits. Like the play can't stand without that monologue. And a lot, and like I'm thinking of the other, like, in Cymbeline, like there are certain things that are like that. And Pericles, like the character of Gower, just like randomly showing up and speaking this whole long monologue. Like, why are you telling us what's going to happen before it happens? And it's like, actually, this character is doing something.
Some exposition.
He does, yeah. And it's like, he does. And it's like, what's a way to do this that's interesting? And like, and if you've got a director who knows their shit and you have a charismatic actor who can sort of carry all that, like it lifts the play up, I think, rather than like drags it down. So
yeah.
Amen. Well, before we get time, we get Leontes. And Leontes is a piece of work. Is he. He's a character that is hard to wrestle with because he has this change, this shift to jealousy that happens so quickly, like probably more quickly than any other character shift in all of Shakespeare. Maybe that might be a grand statement. I might need to take that back, but
yeah, I think you're if it's not, it's certainly up there because it's top of the play and it is nigh immediate. And even like mining the text for, okay, what could have possibly set him off in this situation. It's like, oh, there's not much there. What are we gonna do? Problem play?
Yeah, and that's kind of exactly my question. Like, how do you handle something like this? Like, how do you get an audience to believe that the character is actually feeling it? How do you get an audience on board with following a character when they're behaving this way? Like, I don't know, all the questions about Leontes.
Sure.
Like, how do you get an audience on board with him? Brendan, do you want to start with that?
Sure, absolutely. So my fiance Emily Sucher, who was also on this show, we were joking before we were running these questions, and when we came to this question, Emily said, "You tell me. I have yet to see it done very well at all," and I'm inclined to believe them. It's certainly real fucking tough. I think one thing that interests me is working with the text, but also like adding extra textual elements like movement or interstitial sort of, I don't know, not exactly like inventing new Shakespearean sounding lines, but something that implies that not improves upon the text, but adds to the text, adds another wrinkle to characterization. And while, you know, this particular play would be tough for that because this big fucking change occurs at the very top, there's not a lot of time for that, but I think that there are ways to incorporate that, maybe as like a pre-show sort of thing, or maybe you omit the initial scene with Camillo and other guy and insert something there to sort of fill out that relationship between Leontes and Hermione. Another thing, I had another thought and now it's escaping me. Oh, beans.
Hi, podcast. Hi, podcast.
Ah, shoot. Bad audio. Yeah. Oh, actually, I remember the production of The Winter's Tale that I saw was at the Folger Theatre in DC. It was directed by Aaron Posner. Now, Aaron Posner. He's big into, as I said, adding extra textual sort of things, like the characters introducing themselves to the audience as their characters, saying, "I will be playing this tonight. I'll be playing this. This is a play about this." You know, adding all that kind of stuff that he do. But while he didn't do so much to fill out the relationship between Leontes and Hermione, what he did do in that first scene where everyone's together, he had the characters obviously reading their lines as characters are wont to do, but he also had other characters have them pop out different words that would sort of cue Leontes, I hate this word, trigger him into his jealous rage, and to imply that he was not a well man even before the events of this play. And of the productions that I've been in and the one that I've seen, I think the production sort of sold it the most. I believed that Leontes was not doing real great. That's one way to do it. I know a lot of my perspective is I'm an actor. I see things and I do things. I'm not exactly a director. I don't have that sort of directorial mind. But that's my perspective.
I like that. I mean, I'm all about like fucking with Shakespeare on this podcast.
Yeah.
So
like these texts are like 400 fucking years old. We can try some shit. Yeah.
I mean, they did at the time. They definitely did in the period.
Yes.
Like we are precious about this in a way that like they were not. Like,
sure.
Like, you know, so yeah.
Yeah, I always say there are like 4 different versions of Hamlet, so
yep.
You know.
Oh, but I have a conflated text, and it has this and that, and
yeah.
Oh, this other editor has another thing, and I disagree, and I'm going to slam him in my journal.
Very real. Regine, do you have anything you'd like to add about Leontes?
No, yeah, and I'll preface this by saying that, like, while I don't like adhere to like genre convention, like just because you're doing a tragedy, that means it has to be like depressing the entire 3 hours or whatever. Like, no, like you can actually like find those moments of lightness, lean into the humor. But what I will say that I like about the romances, so Pericles, Cymbeline, The Winter's Tale, and Tempest, is that I think about what is the play trying to illuminate generally. And for me, they're stories about redemption and, you know, recovering something that's lost, about resurrection often, these things that allow us to rebirth, like these sorts of ideas that allow for real big mistakes to have been made, but that not being the end of the person themselves, right? And so while it is initially like what the fuck, Leontes, because you're right, it's like right off the bat he's just this jealous man, and he's paranoid and just, you know, untrusting and all of these things, it can turn you off. You're like, well, why the fuck am I going to care about this guy? Mm-hmm. And so I think for me, like, and it's hard to set that at the top when that sort of character emerges so quickly, that this is going to be a story about redemption and reconciliation and, you know, rebirth and all of that stuff. Like, it's really hard to like establish that really quickly when, like, I don't know, 20 lines in, roar is coming from Leontes. But that said, I think that this is one of those moments where like paying attention to the exposition is important. I think, you know, the fact that Polixenes has been at court for 9.5 months and Hermione is about to have the baby. And it's like, you know, these are two people that, if I remember correctly, they hadn't really met before, hadn't really spent time together before. And when we meet them, we see this really intimate friendship. And because, you know, it is a world in which that sort of intimate friendship between a man and a woman must be problematic if they are not husband and wife. Mm-hmm. You can see the ways in which like the structures of that kind of society are playing on Leontes. And also, you know, like, and I've often, so I read this, there's this, Hogarth is doing like the novelization of the Shakespeare plays. So like Hagseed is like the novel version of The Tempest. And one of the first ones to come out was for The Winter's Tale, A Gap in Time. And it's beautiful. It's not perfect. I have all sorts of issues with it, but it is actually kind of a beautiful novel. And the thing that has stuck with me from the moment that I read it is there's a line, and I think it's like the Paulina character who says this, is like talking about Hermione and Polixenes, the Hermione and Polixenes character, who cares if they're a little bit in love with each other? Because you're all a little bit in love with each other. And so there's this world in which... Exactly. Polixenes, right? Like,
there you go.
I think there's like a world in which, like, you know, Leontes is looking at his best friend, who maybe was more than just a friend, if you think about the way to describe how they grew up together.
Oh,
when you think about like
two lambs frisking in the sun.
Exactly. Like, so like there's this intimate friendship, and then here's his wife who, like, you know, he's having like this other intimate relationship with, and then like the two of them seem to be having an intimate relationship. And I wonder if there's a world where Leontes is like, in having the two most important people in my life come together to be important to each other, am I losing either or both of them? Right? Like, and I get that. Right? Like, that makes sense to me when, like, I mean, I have a very good friend of mine who's always like, it's kind of a joke, but it's not. When her friends hang out without her, she's like, okay, it's okay, you can hang out without me, but don't forget me. And I'm like, oh, I get that. I absolutely understand that. You know, like, I've been in that situation where, like, you know, I have a very close friendship with someone and we introduce a third person, and like, and I see them getting along, and I'm like, I am so happy that you like each other, but also please don't leave me. like don't become a thing and forget me. And I can see when I put that sort of human spin on it, you know, and of course it means that you have to, like, the audience needs to remember all this other exposition, right? Which is sometimes hard in Shakespeare because there's so much that's coming at you. You hold on to things that are like immediately in front of you. But if you have that exposition in your mind, two old friends, you know, what, he's come to the court, he's been there for 9.5 months, she's 9.5 months pregnant, she's about to have the baby. Is it my baby? Is it his baby? Like, I've watched them like get really, really close, and like, I don't know, like I put them together. Like, I can see how easily one could spiral, right? In it feels very human. Yeah. And I actually appreciate that, because it's like, right, that is how frail my own humanity is. And it's scary to be reminded of that. And maybe that's why we're like, Leontes. But I actually am like, no, actually, Leontes. And I believe that, like, because that is so human, hating him is actually not an option, because I need to believe that he's redeemable, because that means I can be redeemable too. So yeah, I don't know how you do that. Like, I think, you know, the idea of like extra textual stuff, you know, is helpful. But like, you know, I think if I were to direct a version of The Winter's Tale, I think for me, establishing that trio as a whole, as a unit, as opposed to like somehow broken up, I think that would be really important.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Looking at him through that lens, or even thinking about looking at him through that lens, I can feel myself relating to him less like, it's like, stop, please stop doing everything that you're doing, and more of a like, oh no, stop. Like, like I don't want to have to watch you do this.
Yeah.
But from a place of care, instead of from a place of like, I don't want to watch the victim have to go through everything you're about to put them through.
Right.
Which is what I think I typically see him as.
Yeah, and that's not to excuse the bullshit he's about to do.
Yes.
But like, you know, I think, you know, to sit there in the audience and say like, I would never do that, something that horrific, do it all the time, right? Like, maybe we're not condemning people to death, but like, I will never speak to you again because of a misunderstanding, or like, you know, we have those kind of huge, you know, breaks all the time. And
you know, it's very much you know, it's very much Leontes' story, even though like Hermione suffers a lot and is thrown under the bus, and it has her son die and her child taken away from her, and then she dies, and or maybe she doesn't, we'll find out. You know, but it's Leontes' redemption arc, and I feel like from modern sensibilities, that's the sticking point. You know, in ye olde Elizabethan times, oh god, you know, it's very much definitely totally a man's world, and it's a very masculine society. Even with a queen, it's still preoccupied with men. So much hinges upon this character development, this redemption that we don't get to see because I don't know. And there's so much on Leontes just structurally because of this play. It's a pickle, and it's a very thin needle to thread.
Yeah, and you're right. Like, there is so much, because we center Leontes in those first 3 acts. It does feel like it's this like sort of, you know, male centric play. Like, Leontes is the person you have to be invested in if you are invested in this play. But actually, I think what's really lovely about it is that this play doesn't work if not for the women. If not for the women, there would be no point in this play. Like, Paulina, who is both sort of, you know, voice of morality and ethics and courage, who is the boss to be like, you're a fucking asshole and you're wrong and you're gonna regret this one day. And she's so right that Leontes gives himself over to her and says like, you know what, you were right. Whatever you tell me, I'll do. So yeah, he's a king, but he sort of relinquishes his own self-sovereignty to this woman who was the only person who was brave enough to say you're wrong, and was right. And, you know, and I know there are productions where at the end they want Hermione to kind of turn him away, but I find that Hermione, if you think about like this, and you know, not that I'm religious, but there are such Christian elements in the play. If you think of Hermione as redeemer, as savior, to play it that she forgives him is actually this really beautiful moment. And there are people who's like, well, how do you like how do you like, justify her forgiving him for being such an asshole? And it's like, is he truly repentant? That's how you figure it out. If your Leontes is truly repentant, and if you think about it, he spent the last 16 years in penitence unendingly, then there's something to be said about that. Like, again, time, what does time do in this play? Yeah.
So I'm not non-religious. I grew up Catholic. I'm hard lapsed. But I was pretty observant for a while, because I was a church cantor. So I also have baked in Christianity in me. But
13 years of Catholic school, so I understand.
I'm so sorry. Yeah, and my partner is Jewish, and talking through this, I mean, it's just different cultures, and you say what you will about Abrahamic religions, it's very, there are differences, obviously. But yeah, I've mostly been thinking about this from a secular lens, but yeah, imagining it as a Christian-ish allegory almost. Yeah, that forgiveness, that the divine forgiveness, even with, Apollo or whatever you will. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
And it's funny, it's interesting, like in these later plays, so sorry, like this is nerd me talking about, like going back to this idea of genre, the plays that are now thought of as the romances, it's, Pericles was like around 1609, Cymbeline would have been like 1610-ish, Winter's Tale, like, 16, around that same time, and then Tempest in 1612, 13. All four of them have this idea of forgiveness rolling through them, right? Like there's the pivotal scene in Tempest where, Ariel says, if I were human, I would feel pity for these humans who are going through some shit, which is Prospero putting them through some emotional shit. And Prospero's like, oh shit, yeah, if you as a non-human can feel pity, then why I as a human should be able to feel pity, and that leads him to forgiveness. It's a similar thing in Cymbeline. Iachimo is forgiven. In Pericles, even, this man goes through all this shit, and there's not so much that he needs to forgive anything, but there is this world of like people kind of being reborn in a place of like ethical and moral goodness after, maybe doing some really fucked up shit. And it's interesting to think about, like, what, I mean, you don't want to be like biographical with this stuff, but Shakespeare's working through some pretty interesting philosophical things in these plays. I think it's why, like, that element when we were saying earlier, like how, like kind of leaning into the magical or the supernatural or the like non-realist part of it, because you can't really do that in realist terms, but you can in a fairy tale. Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Regine, since you were just talking all about magical feelings in this play and also about the wonderful Paulina, whatever you want to call her.
Paulina.
Paulina, yes. There we go. That's the one. I guess we should dive into talking about her a little bit.
Yeah.
She has a little bit of controversy surrounding her and what she does in the play. People love to debate whether or not Paulina is a magical character who creates a statue of Hermione, who is 16 years older than the one that died, and magically brings her to life. Or if she is just like a really badass friend who came up with an amazing plan to stow her bestie away for a little while until her husband could get himself straight, and brought her back when things were ready for her. So I am curious, with that debate, what both of you think the pros and cons of kind of both of those sides are, and then what your preference is. Regine, would you like to start with that one?
Yeah. So this is a tricky one because, like, so when I first read the play, the first time I ever read The Winter's Tale, and it's one of those plays, it's one of the plays with some of the trickiest language in Shakespeare. The like syntax and the like structure of lines is so odd and so when you're reading it, you're kind of like, first off, what are you actually saying and doing before you even like, is what you're saying and doing like believable? And I remember, because like I am trained to be a skeptic, and I also just naturally am like a cynic. I remember being like, no way, like, nah, this isn't magic. Like, y'all two conspired together to pretend like she was dead and blah 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 blah. And I remember feeling like that quite viscerally. But then I saw it, like, I saw a production of The Winter's Tale for the first time in 2018. I was in London. It was at the Globe. And this is the reason why I went to see it. The biggest reason why I wanted to see it was because I was like, does this moment work? Does this moment land? Does Paulina get away with it? Or not does she get away with it, but can Paulina be trusted? Right. Mm. And so I'm watching it, and I'm standing in the yard, and I'm like, paying attention. And the actor who played Hermione is on a pedestal and in like perfect stillness. And I'm like, but we know, like, she's not really dead. Like, it's not really a statue, because, I'm an actor, and I'm like, I know she's an actor, and all this stuff. And the whole thing is happening, but the emotional weight of the moment, because you've got Leontes, who spent 16 years regretting what he did and in penitence for what he did. And you've got Perdita there, who never knew her mother and is seeing her mother for the first time. And all these other people who were like, we mourned her, she's gone. And yet here's this lifelike representation of her. And oh my God, like even though they think that it's a statue, but it's so lifelike and it's so real. And it's even aged like she would be. And how that affects them. And what's wild is, like, emotion is catching. That's the thing. Feeling is catching. If it's like when you hear a baby cry and you feel, is that baby okay? Or if walk by somebody who's crying and you're like, I don't know if I should intrude upon their personal space, but are you okay? Or how laughter is infectious. If someone starts laughing, you start laughing too. And so what happens is
empathetic beings. Yeah,
exactly. So what ends up happening is, like, it is actually the emotion of the moment that takes over, and you almost don't give a shit if Paulina is telling the truth or not, because the emotion of the moment is so big and so full and so real that you cannot help but partake in it. And so what happened was, in that moment when Hermione like comes, and I actually like looked this up so I could say it, like, I remember the moment. So Paulina says, she's like, I can do magic. Like, if you want her to move, I can make it happen. And Leontes is like, please make it happen, make it happen. And Paulina said, it is required you do awake your faith. And I started crying immediately. Because that's what it's about. It's actually, it doesn't matter if Paulina's magical or not. It doesn't matter if it's a miracle or not. What matters is, do you have faith in this moment? And I think the question is, what do you have faith in? Do you have faith in love? Do you have faith in forgiveness? Do you have faith in family and relationships? If you do, trust that, give into that. And so I just like bought it hook, line, and sinker. I was like, I don't even fucking care. Like, I was trying to look at like the actor playing Hermione to see, like, is she twitching? Like, like I was like, because like I was just so like, I'm such a fucking cynic. I was like, no, I'm gonna catch it. And I was like, no, it doesn't matter. I bought it. And it was so effective that I remember, like, months later watching a recording of it, because I was in London at the time, and I was in the archives at the Globe, and so they like record everything, and so you can like request an appointment to watch productions at the Globe for like research purposes. And I'm watching it, and it's not even like a great video, it's just like a straight on video. So it's not even like wide shot. And I'm sitting in this like tiny room watching it, and again she says the lines, it is required you do awake your faith, and I immediately start crying. And a friend walks in, and I turn around, I'm like, hey. She's like, oh my God, are you okay? It's like, no, I'm fine, I'm just watching The Winter's Tale. And Hermione just woke up, and I'm just a mess. And that is how the play works, because that moment doesn't work if those first three acts don't work. Like, if you don't sort of like just give yourself over to the moment, then it doesn't that like it's not going to happen. Like it doesn't matter that Hermione's back. You're just gonna like, but if you kind of just let yourself kind of like Leonte's fucked up and Perdita didn't have her mom and now she's back and she's in love. And I think it's more about the magic of theater than about the magic of a person.
Huh.
And that's for me what was so beautiful about it. And it's still like full body emotion every time.
I feel like that is one of the moments that when you're in a theater, if it's working, it's like you can cut the tension in the theater with a knife, but in the best way possible.
Yes.
Yeah. Really amazing. Brendan, do you want to add anything to that?
I just want to say, Regine, that was such a lovely and beautiful answer. But unfortunately, this question awakened the worst part of me, which is this pedantic sort of cinema sense kind of lore-seeking nerd who overthinks the world building of stuff. And okay, so in this recording, I have been really just really simping hard for my boy Mamilius, and this question awakened my faith in wanted to take justice for this boy. So anyway, magic. Okay, let's think about the pros and cons here. If Paulina is able to wield magic, well, obviously in this world, this is a society that puts a lot of faith in the gods as like arbiters in human affairs. You know, they have Cleomenes and Dion, I don't know. Celine Dion go out to receive a premonition from the Delphic oracle about whether or not Leontes is actually not being a huge fucking douche. So like in that society, you know, there is this sort of divine magic that exists in the world in a material sense. And for Leontes' hubris, Leontes' son Mamilius is killed, so that has a palpable effect. Magic exists in this world. So with that, if Paulina is able to wield this magic and bring Hermione back to life, why doesn't she fucking do that for Mamilius? Come on. That's
a really
huge
good question.
Fucking oversight. Huge fucking oversight.
That is a really good question.
Thank you. Thank you. Hashtag justice for Mamilius. I really want this trending. This is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. And also, when I said that I've seen one production, I've lied. I've seen two. Just one wasn't in person. I saw Cheek by Jowl do a production online on YouTube a couple years back. I watched it when I was supposed to be working at my desk job. And they actually had Mamilius come back at the end when there's this big, you know, lovely tableau with the actors. And just in silence, Mamilius is there and while everyone else is still, he just kind of wanders through, takes a look, and leaves.
Ooh.
This is all very off topic to Paulina. But so let's bring it back to that. If Paulina is not magic, okay, let's say that Hermione is sheltered away safely off stage for 16 years. For me personally, this is a matter of taste. I feel like that strains some credibility. Paulina, I assume, lives nearby to wherever the fuck Leontes lives / is seeking penitence for his huge fucking crimes against humanity. Is Hermione just kind of kicking it? And when they have to go out in public, she puts on you know, those glasses with the big nose and the mustache, the Groucho Marx glasses.
Hey, look, you know, I grew up in Utah, and Elizabeth Smart was like missing in plain sight for a long time. So.
Oh damn! Oh well, okay. You're bringing
know.
Elizabeth Smart into this. Well, now I feel like a huge jackass. Okay. Anyway, Emily, my partner, they said that what they really want to see is the cottagecore lesbian romance between Hermione and Paulina, just kind of kicking it while Leontes is over there in his hair shirt, dealing with his shit. Finally, men will blame their wives for a made-up crime and cause their firstborn son to die rather than go to therapy. It's a huge tragedy. The end of my inane bullshit, which didn't answer anything of value.
So the only thing I want to add, I was talking to somebody recently, and I don't even remember why we were talking about The Winter's Tale, but he was talking about a production where he saw that like the Milius was played as a complete and total brat, like just the worst fucking child. Like you knew.
So we're glad the kid dies.
No. So like. But sort of like, like imagine like, Trump at 11 years old. Like if it was like, that version of Mamilius, like just a brat, spoiled, just a little son of a bitch, like a Leontes in training. And so, if you want the world to be okay, well, you don't want that to come back, right? And so maybe so that I think that's one way that that particular production, he was like, and for him he was like, and it made so much sense. It made so much sense why like we couldn't have him come back and why he had to go, because like he was just a terrible child. And I was like, okay, that is really, really interesting. The other thing I was going to say, if I sort of remember what it was going to be, was like, I think the thing about this play, and it sucks because like, yes, justice for Mamilius, like let's have an actual reason why he has to die. Like this 11-year-old needs to go. But there is something to be said about like, if redemption is to come through the women, then Perdita needs to not have something in her way, right? Like as Leontes' only child, she inherits the kingdom. Mm-hmm. Well, that's a lie. Because she marries Florizel. Florizel. Yeah. But because she is like the only child, so you have this like new world that is kind of sort of like established through like the line of the women, and there's something about that. I mean, I don't want to go into was Shakespeare feminist or not. I'm not going to go into that because I think that's a bit of a reductive conversation. But there's something about that like feels, I don't know, like again I think about in the romances how it is Marina, it is like a savior figure, and even Miranda in her own way like is this like savior figure, or if not savior, this like figure that like lifts everybody up. And so if the heir to everything were a man, does that mean that we would just keep playing this sort of paranoia, this paranoid patriarchy over and over and over again, versus like these women who, yes, they have been wronged, but like also they're like, you know what, like let us begin again.
Mm-hmm. Like the justice for Mamilius is the redemption of everybody else.
Maybe.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah, maybe.
The real treasure was the Mamilius in all of us, is what we right. Somewhere the ghost of Mamilius is like, no, that's not right. No, I want to live again. I want to taste food again.
I want to be a real boy.
I want to be a real boy.
Yeah.
Oh my.
Wow.
All right. Well, let's transition into what I think is the most fun question that we have today, which is this play. It's got like the most iconic stage direction of all time. He exits pursued by a bear. But I think it's so interesting because like every theater kid knows this line. Like everybody kind of knows exit pursued by a bear. If you're a Shakespeare kid, you definitely know it. But if you're not a Shakespeare kid and you show up and you don't know that exit pursued by a bear is coming at the end of the first act, I don't know. So I think it can present an interesting like directorial challenge, because it could cost like a lot of money to put a more literal version of this on stage. But I've definitely also seen when I don't know if you remember this, Brendan, but at the Folger, it was basically just like the lights turned off.
Yeah, they solved the problem by getting rid of the bear.
Yeah, they just kind of didn't do anything. And I was like, well, I know what that's supposed to mean, but I have a
Like,
feeling.
exit pursued by bear?
Yeah, like
I think they had the guy say that.
he may have, yeah.
Yeah.
And
Oh
like, if I
Or an
were an
actor,
audience member who was not familiar with this play, I would be like, what?
What's going on?
Aaron Posner.
So yeah, I'm just interested in like, how do you approach a stage direction like that? What fun ideas might you have? Do either of you have a preference for who starts?
May I start?
Yeah, go
Yes,
for
please.
it.
Okay. In my productions, they both dealt with it in very different ways, both involving, a puppet and puppet-like elements. Chesapeake Shakespeare had a big sort of bread and puppet style bear, where three actors came out on stage with big poles. Like two of them had paws, and one was the main, bear head torso thing. With that, they disguised it coming into the scene with fog, and it had glowing eyes and very dim, dreadful sort of lighting. Not the lighting was not dreadful. The lighting was wonderful. I don't want to drag any of my coworkers at CSC. What I meant was that they created an atmosphere of dread. There we go. Saved it. So it kind of snuck on, and then kind of. But in you can't really when you're a big bear puppet, did a big sort of splay of the arms and grabbing Antigonus and dragging him to his doom. With Baltimore Shakespeare Factory, the bear was revealed over time with different actors standing in as part of living scenery, sort of building the bear very gradually from these polygonal abstract shapes, which came to form the bear, which then killed Antigonus. I'm not going to say what I thought did things better or worse, because that's tacky. I will say, my rule of thumb, if I had my druthers, and if I were any kind of competent director, I would follow the George Lucas, Steven Spielberg, like Jaws reveal, like keep the monster hidden until absolutely necessary. It needs to be shown. You can't really fix a wide swath of Shakespeare knowledge in terms of, I didn't know there was going to be a bear in this. But I think you can convey the surprise and the terror of this creature very suddenly, as part of this very wild play where fucking anything can happen. Yeah, just basically keep it cute with the monster until you need to be big with it.
I love that. Regine, what would you like to add?
No, I mean, I think I agree with that. It's tricky, right? Because like you said, it's one of like the most famous stage directions in Shakespeare, and maybe like of ever. Of like any play, right? Because it's
Enter
like,
Pirates, though, is up there.
yes. But it's also just like, but a bear is so random. It's so fucking random, and it's like, what? Like, but why? Like, why? And I think I agree with Brendan. Like, like the idea of the monster present without necessarily seeing it until we need to see it. And I do want, like, this is one of those things that I don't know that you actually need to see it ever, actually, because it's such a brief moment that like you could just instruct your actor to see the thing and maybe like have a sound cue react to it and go.
Sorry to interrupt. I would also like to add an addendum to the sort of Jaws rule. This sort of the flip side of keeping it hidden until you need to reveal. Also, know when to hide it again, because if you have people staring at the bear you just made for too long, then people are like, oh, that doesn't really look like a bear, or I could have done a better bear with my theater company. Yeah. Sorry to interrupt. Please continue.
No, that was actually the perfect interruption, because I was about to say the one time that I saw a production of Winter's Tale, and this is the same Globe production that I saw that made me cry at the end. Like the bear was just this, like, I don't know if it was like what it was, but it was like a banner hanging up, and when it was time, like the banner just dropped, and it was like a bear, like grr, and I was like, that felt so anticlimactic because like I knew it was coming. I was like, because it's also like he's just landed on the shores of Bohemia, so he's on a beach. Like, why would a bear be on the beach? Like, I don't know, do bears hang out on a beach? And
Surfing
like,
bear.
and like, of course, like part of the history is that like maybe.
Sorry. Continue, please.
Bear snacks. But like, and part of the thing is like, it's entirely possible that when the play was going on, like there was some bear baiting happening, and so there was like, we've got this bear, why don't we use it? Awesome. But it's also like, like, but why? Like again, like using the bear because the bear is there is like whatever. Anyway, but I remember feeling like, oh, that's really anticlimactic. Like I was so interested to see what you were gonna do, and that just feels like a joke. Like, you know what I mean? Like a ha ha bear, but not really. And I feel like it would have probably been more like thrilling if it were sound and lights, and because there's like a storm happening, and like there's all these ways that you can sort of like hide the whole notion of it. And I was like, maybe that's the time that you lean into theater magic and stage design as opposed to just like trying to make the bear real.
Yeah, like come on, Globe, you have how much money? I mean, granted, they did deal with some.
In fairness, they don't have as much money as we think.
That's totally fair. As soon as I said that, it's like I remember them almost having to shudder. It's like, oh yeah, that not entirely accurate American Brendan.
I got to see your Chesapeake version, Brendan, and I thought it was excellently done.
Okay.
Like,
cool.
Especially like in my experience with Shakespeare, some of my favorite moments have been from kind of the lower budget companies and seeing like, okay, how are you going to make this magic happen without $1 million? And I thought that puppet was so cool. I thought the entrance of the puppet was so cool. The eyes came first and did like peer through the fog perfectly. Yeah, I don't know. I think there are so many fun ways to do exactly what you just said, Regine. Like lean into that theater magic and get creative, and you'll find a way. But maybe don't just turn the lights off.
No, don't do that. That's too meta. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Or just drop a poster. I feel like just turning the lights off. Like I'd be sitting there, I'm like, is there a blackout happening? Like what's going on? You know what I mean? Oh yeah, I think it's like when given the opportunity to do something that's like a little bit ridiculous, really go for it. Because why not? Like because I just think to myself, like Shakespeare's writing this, and someone just say like, we've got a bear. There's a bear. Like it's gonna be there. So like we're gonna have it until like Monday morning. So you want to use it.
We have to utilize this bear.
It's gonna be making noises during the show anyway, so justify it.
I like to imagine taking it in a fantastical direction instead of real life, which is horrifying sometimes. Bill, we have the Baron Bearsley of Bearbridge. He has wanted to. He's enjoyed our company for so long. Would you please? He could give us so much funding. Would you just have him walk on? It could be really lovely, I think.
It's the inspiration
just a bear. Or just, like a bear royal. But of course, that doesn't exist. We don't have anthropomorphic bears, and that's honestly a con of this universe.
It is a shame. All right, y'all. Well, before we exit Pursued by a Bear, I have one final question. So, sorry. This
no. So if you didn't say it, I'd be disappointed.
Right. So I think this play is a gem. It is one of my favorites in the Shakespeare canon. Yeah. And I don't think it gets produced as much as it could. Like, I would love to see it up there with the Romeo and Juliets of the world. Yep. And I think, like, part of why it doesn't get produced is maybe this problem play status a little bit. But I think it's also just that it's a lesser known play comparatively. So I'm just wondering, like, what would the two of you say to somebody who was considering producing this and was nervous about it, or maybe a theater company who is avoiding it altogether for some reason, to get them to give it a shot. Regine, do you want to start with that?
I feel this way about so many Shakespeare plays, like that people just, they're a little bit like, I don't know what to do with it, so let me do something that everybody knows what to expect. And I'm like, well, actually, but that's actually the exact reason why to do it, because nobody would know what to expect. There's so much room to cultivate how this play could be seen, could be received, could be experienced, because no one ever does it. I mean, like, how many Romeo and Juliets have we seen? Is it ever different? Is Juliet like, and I love Juliet. I think Juliet is one of the great characters of the canon. Like, I put her up there with Hamlet and Macbeth and Lear as like the great roles. But like, we've seen so many Juliets, and we've seen so many Beatrices and Benedicts, and I'm like, here's a play that we don't often do, that we still have questions about, that we're still trying to figure out, we're still trying to understand and try to like make it make sense. Is that not what theater is for, right? Like, the whole point is like, let's take something that's hard and difficult and tough and unclear, and let's use the space for play and experimentation and pretend and imagination to figure things out. And I think The Winter's Tale does that. I think it asks all the big questions and just asks us like, okay, how do we figure this out? How do we figure out how to forgive? How do we figure out how to repent? How do we figure out to say, I was wrong? Like, the things that are so hard for us to do. Like Leontes has to say, I was wrong. He does come to that conclusion, and yes, maybe it's too late for Mamilius, it's maybe too late for Hermione, it's too late for Perdita, but he does say, I was wrong and I'm sorry, and let me repent for that, and then spend 16 years doing that, right? And there's something, in a world where it's so hard to do that, so hard to say I'm sorry, and it's so hard to forgive. Here's a play that like asks us to like actually figure that out, and work through that. And that's what I love to do. Like, I mean, I the plays that like have room left to explore and ask big questions, those are the ones that I love to do. And so I think, be brave, like that's kind of cliche and like, like cheesy, but like, if you are doing this play, it asks you to be brave and bold and to be open and generous. And I think, I think of myself as a storyteller before I think of myself as anything else. And I think that sort of opportunity is always going to be a gift. That's why I say do The Winter's Tale.
Amen. Yeah. I think if you're not going to be brave, why do theater in the first place?
Truth.
Yeah.
But I want to do safe things. I want to make money.
Want to be comfortable and wear a pretty dress.
Yeah.
That's
all I want in my theater. Be comfortable, wear a pretty dress.
I can't blame you for the latter. But Brendan, do you have anything you would like to add to that?
Yeah. So what I think is interesting about this play, and this going back to the question of the two halves of the play and how different they are, they're sort of a yin and yang. On one half, you have this very dark period full of jealousy and anger and torment and abuse. But you have this little spot of light with Perdita being saved and being raised up. And there's hope for the future and hope for redemption for Leontes as well. And then you have the other half, which is lighter and frothier and full of fun and dancing satyrs and wonderful things that cause you to awaken your faith. But there is that bit of shadow there. You have Polixenes spying on his son, Florizel going behind his dad's back. Perdita, we could talk about the shepherd and his whole thing too, where like he blames Perdita and his whole dealy. Yeah, so like, taking the halves, leaning into both, Regine, you said earlier, finding different elements in these different parts of the canon. Tragedies can have quite funny bits in them, and comedies can have these really kind of things that make you go, huh, well, that makes me feel kind of bad, actually. Yeah, leaning into those two things, I think this play can lend itself to finding different parts of the human experience. I think it's a very rich vein of that sort of raw emotion to be found in there.
Yeah.
And also, I think we've talked a lot about how we can earn the audience's trust with finding ways to make Leontes, if possible, not likable, but worthy of that redemption in the audience's eyes, and earning the trust, like, oh, this thing that happened with the statue, it can make Regine cry in London. But I think also what's important as performers, as people who produce theater, we also have to trust the audience as well.
Yeah.
Even with when this play throws people a curveball where, oh, there's a bear. Or what the fuck? That man got angry real quick. We have to trust the audience that they can keep up with us. And when we do our jobs well, they can do that. So, that's we joked about making easy theater, but this play being as chock-a-block with difficulties as it is, when we do our job right, we can release our preconceptions and our anxieties, like, oh, I hope they get this, I hope they do this. It's like, they'll watch. And hey, maybe they won't like it. That's them. This play may not make people very happy. If you're producing this play, people might not buy Leontes' redemption at the end. They reject it. And I think that's okay. Theater criticism, I think it's worthwhile. It kind of sucks when you're like, oh man, this reviewer did not like it. And they brought up some actually valid points. But yeah, I think just trusting in your own craft.
Yeah.
You must awaken your faith in your own work to deliver this, not only a product, but a story, as a collaborative story told with all of our friends in costumes and lights and staging. Yeah.
Awesome. If I may add to that, I think that was so that's exactly it. We talk about willing suspension of disbelief when you go to see the theater. And because we say disbelief, the thing about disbelief is if you do that, if you're an audience member and you're like, yes, I'm gonna let go of that ability to disbelieve in something, and inherently what you're also doing is I'm gonna have faith that these people aren't gonna steer me wrong in the story that I need to hear. And I also think I'm not one of those people to revere Shakespeare. I love the material, I love the work, but I don't think of him as the be all and end all. But there is something so lovely about he said to himself, sure, exit pursued by a bear, sure, Hermione is a statue. So it's it's
taking some big swings.
Yeah, so if he's gonna take that big swing, I say let's go on that journey with him. Why not? Why not take that as an audience member? When I'm an audience member, I want the thing that I'm seeing to take me on that. I want to hop on that roller coaster and take that drop and just and I'm trusting you that it's all gonna work out well. Don't take advantage of that, obviously, but also trust that the audience is willing to go there with you. Because otherwise they wouldn't have come to see the fucking show.
It's a lot better to with these later plays. Shakespeare they're very experimental. He makes those big swings. Yeah. And rather than making very safe theater, we're being very brave this season. We're going to put on Mackers. No, I love the play, and I think it's going to be great. Rather than doing safe Shakespeare, just really go for it, man. Swing big with Shakespeare. Yeah, that's just a roundabout way to say I agree.
I'm this is the thing that I'm preaching all the time. Is I think people forget that when Shakespeare was writing, the whole fucking thing was a big ass experiment. They didn't fucking know. They were making it up as they go. They were literally, it was are people going to want to see theater on a regular basis? I don't fucking know. Let's just write the stories and see. And, you know, the notion that like you do Shakespeare because it's safe when Shakespeare itself wasn't safe, or any of his contemporaries, is just like, well, you're not paying attention to what the dude was doing. And so I'm just like, like, do the weird plays, man. Like that.
Get weird with it, man.
Yeah, just do the fucking weird ones. Like I like, you know, I know this is slightly off topic, but I find the ones that are like the fucking weirdest and like what was he smoking? Those are the ones that are the most fun and the most revelatory. Yeah,
definitely.
And on this weed podcast, I think that is the perfect place to wrap up.
Yes.
So before we say goodbye to y'all, I think this episode will drop. It's a week from next Tuesday. I'm not sure what that date is. But before you go, if you have any projects that are coming up in like late May or over the summer that you might want to plug, Regine, do you have anything?
I mean, like the biggest project that I'm going to plug right now is As You Like It with Actors Shakespeare Project. If you are in the greater Boston area of Massachusetts, come on down and see it. We're playing at the Balch Arena at Tufts University in the Somerville, Medford area. And I think it's going to be a bit of a party. It's a gender expansive exploration of the play, and I think it's going to be just, you know, lovely and bright and fun, and come and see it if you're in the area.
Hell yeah. I will link to that in the show notes. And Brendan, how about you?
This summer I am blessedly free. I've recently incorporated boundaries into my life.
Nice.
And yeah.
Nice. Sweet.
Hamlet has taken up a good chunk of this year. So I'll be taking some time to travel, to finally plan our wedding. I just heard from the other room, my partner cheered. And I'm going to explore other avenues of performance. I'm also an emerging voiceover artist. So if you want to hear my work, you can find me on Instagram at Gumption Voiceovers, and you can also find me on SoundCloud with Gumption Voiceovers. Hire me, please.
Yes.
Do.
Yeah, and that's been a big part of this year, just kind of auditioning everywhere and submitting. I just crossed the 140 auditions / submissions threshold, and every 20 submissions I get to buy myself something nice. So I'm still figuring out what to buy, because I am a full-on consumerist drone.
As we all are.
Truly.
I love capitalism. Let's talk about it sometime.
That's another podcast. Well, congratulations on having some free time this summer, and I'm excited for you and Emily to get married. You're weirdly recording your episodes of this podcast like almost a month apart, but your episodes are coming out a week apart. So Emily from last week's episode is marrying Brendan here. So yes, exciting things. Anyway, thank you both so much for coming and talking about this play.
Thank you for having us.
It's my pleasure. My pleasure.
It was a delight. I'm so glad the two of you hit it off the way that you did.
I drank most of a bottle of wine. Wait, you
Hell
can't
yeah.
Hell yeah.
Like haven't done that in a while.
That's what the podcast is for. This was awesome, and we'll be back next week to talk about The Merchant of Venice. It will be less fun.
Boy.
Yeah.
That's gonna be an intense one.
Yeah. We'll see y'all then.
Good luck.
If you enjoyed today's episode, you can follow Regine, Brendan, and Bulls with the Bard at the handles either on your screen or in the description. And tune in next week as we talk with Steph Cragnola of the Protest Too Much podcast and my good friend B about Troilus and Cressida. Until then, bye y'all.
1,000 sighs to save. Oh, lay me where sad true lover never find my grave to weep there.